Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul. I'm just going to do a quick video on the CBC. So what I've done is I've downloaded the financial statement for CBC just to give you an idea of its revenue and expense line and its overall results. And if you look at the overall results for CBC, they're in almost close to a $20 million loss position. And that's significant when you start looking at any sort of government entity that's really dependent on funding. Is it bringing money in? Is it at least balancing its budget or balancing itself, or is it running a profit? And that's something you need to be concerned of when you're starting to look at facts and figures. The second point I want to bring into this is CBC could not subsist without the operational grant of $1 billion a year. It couldn't. It wouldn't be able to operate. Now, if you were to take that operational grant away, CBC would then be forced to make key decisions. Now, like any sort of business model, and I come from a finance background, you look at ways to increase your revenue, whether that means basically new advertising or look at options. Now, CBC has a huge vault out there that nobody seems to be talking about in terms of leveraging it through Netflix or even the DVD markets. And I estimate that possibly that could generate them 350 to maybe 500 million a year in terms of sales and just licensing stuff. So why doesn't CBC talk about that in terms of looking at their vault and looking at passing those historical things down to future generations, like to give opportunities? The other thing too is you also have to be expense management side, right? So you have to look at your overall cost, and you may have to scale back shows and start putting priority into different things. Well, there's no discussion on that either as well. So if you're looking at the CBC as any sort of business would, is you're going to have to do a operational review, and you shouldn't be really depending on a handout to operate. And that's what CBC is kind of upset about, which you can understand their perspective why they would be that way. Now let's talk about issues with CBC. And you'll notice on the left hand side I put some shows up there. A lot of them are familiar with those people that have grown up, that are born in like the 50s, 60s, and 70s, that grew up with the hype of when CBC was putting out some good quality programmings like Beachcombers, The Friendly Giant, Mr. Dress Up, Street Legal, Edison Twins, Danger Bay. There's more shows, but these ones are just the cusp of what I wanted to kind of show you. Now what I want to show you is the right hand side is the issues. Okay, so right now there's a lot of debate going out on how you want to handle operational funds. And the NDP seems to be on this big kick that we need to provide funding, whether that's CBC or Canada Post. That funding comes out of that bucket of taxation, whether that's corporate, personal, or consumption taxes. Now what happens is when you put it into a subsidy like CBC or into Canada Post, what basically happens is that money's taken away from somewhere else. So those of you who are out there complaining about healthcare dollars, not enough money is being put there, but you seem to be okay with these subsidies going to businesses that are not in a position that they're making money. So if that's being said, you need to ask yourself, is this the most optimization of money, or should there be other ways that media or companies like CBC or Canada Post should be forced to operate in terms of their benefits to the overall economy in terms of taxation? Now, everybody could argue that you can't put a price on a public broadcaster, but in essence, if you go around the world, a lot of cases, especially if you look at the US doesn't have public broadcaster. They have private industry that's actually doing their own media work. So realistically, are you going to be impacted if CBC was spun off? Not likely, because we've already seen CTV and Global are spun off, so that you're not going to see that impact. The other thing is, the underlying rules that govern broadcasting up here is the CRTC, which is government regulation. Irregardless of whether or not CBC is public or not, it still has to follow CRTC rules. So that's something that's also not discussed in terms of Canadian content. So that's something you should also be thinking about in terms of the rhetoric. You shouldn't just be looking at the funding of CBC, you should be looking at all angles of policy.